All right, welcome back to the Bobby Lee Bitcoin podcast. Today, I'm very honored to have Sean Stein here with us. Sean Stein is an amazing person, amazing friend over the last few years. He's currently the co-chair of the China Public Policy at Covington. And Sean recently also is the chairman of the American Chamber of Commerce in China. And previously, when I first met Sean, he was the American Consul General in Shanghai. Right?
I can't believe you remembered all that, but yes. So
yes, amazing.
Yeah.
So a career started in what do you want to call it?
So my career started in the dark ages. So years ago, I hated the State Department, hated the U.S. government.
Yeah, I guess the State Department.
State Department.
What I meant to say, State Department.
And so kind of joined the State Department out of spite like 30 years ago.
Yeah.
And turned out I liked it because, when you start, your job is all about like helping people and meeting people. And so really enjoyed it.
What country did you start in?
So I started in Lagos, Nigeria.
Oh, wow. I did not know that.
So it was so far back.
I was born in the neighbor country, Ivory Coast.
No.
Yes.
So back then, we used to look up to the Ivory Coast because it was, that much more developed, and because it was French, it was more sophisticated, and they had better bread, and it was a great place. Yeah. But so I was down the street in Lagos.
Nigeria, Lagos, that's
and it was a crazy time to be there. Lots of stuff.
In what years?
So I was there 94 to 96.
Got it.
And at that time, Africa had a bad rap, and no one wanted to go to Lagos. No one wanted to go to Nigeria. And I was like, wow, send me, because I thought if I'm going to work in the State Department, it'd be what was called the Foreign Service of the United States.
That's right.
I wanted to go to someplace like foreign. I didn't want to go to Canada. I didn't want to go to London. I wanted to go to the most exotic place imaginable.
Nigeria.
So I was like, Nigeria, send me. And I loved it. It was great.
It
was great. And so I thought I'd stay for maybe 3 years in the State Department.
Yeah.
So 2 assignments, go to Lagos and then someplace else, and then go back to the private sector. But I really, really enjoyed it.
You had to take a test to become a Foreign Service personnel, right?
I did, and I'm embarrassed to say. So I had mentioned earlier, I didn't actually like the State Department. I'd lived in Haiti, and I'd met a bunch of State Department people, and I was like, I don't know, maybe. It just wasn't my scene. It wasn't my crowd. They were wearing suits and jackets and button-down shirts, and I was not, it just didn't feel like my crowd.
Yeah.
But when I was in college, a bunch of my friends were taking the Foreign Service exam. And when they'd say, are you taking the Foreign Service exam? I'd be like, no, what, you don't think you can pass? Well, I'm taking it. You don't think you pass? And so, how that whole social dynamics is, I had to take it when I was in college.
Yes.
And I think because I didn't care and I didn't want to pass, I did the 3 different tests. So I did the written test, which was like the SAT that, lots of people pass. And then the essays, and then that was fine, passed. And then you've got the oral exam, which is this, 12 hours of head games where they try and get in your head. And then, and I passed that. And again, I think it's only because I didn't want to join and didn't care. But so
I see.
But so then a couple of years later, they said, "Hey, come and join us." And it was a moment of weakness, and I said yes. And I went to Lagos and loved it.
So Nigeria today is a big hub. So it's one of the leading countries in all of West Africa. Mm-hmm. Maybe different back in the 90s, and it's also a big Bitcoin and cryptocurrency hub for Africa.
Well, that's what surprised me, because I'm embarrassed to admit that. When I went, because again, I knew other parts of the world, but I didn't know anything about Lagos. That's why I chose it, because I wanted to go someplace different. I don't know what I was expecting. I was expecting what I used to see in old National Geographic magazines, which is, I don't know, safaris and all this. And I go there, and Lagos was a big, quite modern city with really educated and smart, engaging people. And that really sort of opened my eyes. And so I'm not surprised at all that it's a Bitcoin hub and increasingly a technology for Africa hub, and distribution and logistics has become really important.
That's right.
At the time, I knew none of that. But when I got there, I was like, oh, you know what? There's a whole lot more to Africa than I would have ever guessed growing up in, rural Idaho. I guess that was redundant, rural Idaho, but I don't know. Anyway, growing up in Idaho, would have never guessed that someplace like Lagos was as vibrant and had such interesting people.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And then, so I met you several years ago when you were CG in Shanghai. And we got connected. You had some interest in Bitcoin, and that was my line of work. Mm-hmm. So tell us about your sort of cryptocurrency Bitcoin sort of history. What led you down?
So it's funny. So like so many things in my life, it was random coincidence.
Yes.
And so a friend of mine from college was trying to do a startup product and was selling it on a program called Kickstarter. And so he wrote to all of his friends from college saying, please, 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 please go into Kickstarter and just buy something because I need to move up in the rankings or something like this. And so all of me and all my friends, we were buying stuff on Kickstarter. And then I get on their mailing list and they start like sending me stuff.
Yes.
And so, of course, I've heard of Bitcoin, but I'm not interested in Bitcoin.
Yes.
But I've heard of it. And one of the things that was on there was these ballet cards.
Oh, so you saw that in the mailing from Kickstarter?
If it was a mailing or if it was like, it
the
popped
website.
up in my website or in that.
Okay, I didn't even know that. Okay.
Anyway, and
that was 2019 when we had it on Kickstarter.
Yeah, so that would be when it was. And so, and that's exactly what it was, because I remember when my friend started his business. So anyway, and I just sort of thought, oh, that's really interesting. What? I didn't understand what it was. But then by dumb luck, I met you either through a neighbor or through an alumni event or something.
Exactly, Stanford alumni event. Yeah.
And you were talking about this and you showed me one of these cards and I was like, Kickstarter or Indiegogo or whatever it was. And I thought it was the coolest thing in the world because like truly by dumb luck, I've run into the guy, but I bought it before
you bought the ballet thing before you met me.
Yes.
Wow, that's amazing.
But then after I met you, I was like, oh, and then you told me how cool it was. I mean, because it was a steal of a deal, right? At that time, because you got the early action buy, you got this. So, so I then went and bought a couple of more, and I gave them away as Christmas gifts to my children because I had 3 kids.
I see.
And so I was like, okay, I need to have 5, one for me, one for my wife,
perfect,
and then one for each of my kids. So I bought 5,
and you need one for every year. So
see, I didn't see that in the marketing, but anyway, so I bought those, and I gave one to my wife, and my wife was like, as my wife often does, she was like, well, no, what are you doing? And so she's like, yeah, do something with that. 2 of my kids were too young, but my oldest was in high school.
Yeah.
And his friends and other people were talking about Bitcoin. And so that was how we got into Bitcoin first was through that. But then the other thing, I guess, which I should add, is I actually got into Bitcoin by accident in 2017.
Very early, quite early.
Very early, yes. And
6-7 years ago, yeah.
Yeah, so it was early. Maybe it was 2018, but it was early.
Yeah.
And what happened is I was in part of eastern China, a place called Jiangsu.
Yeah.
And I was in the far south of there, or the far north in a place called Lianyungang, which is, not the center of Jiangsu province.
Yeah.
And I shouldn't say this because you're not supposed to do this in China, but I was
using
a VPN.
You were in a different country.
Let's just say I had this dream, and in this dream I was traveling in a strange land.
Yes, that's right.
And my VPN started to fail. It didn't work.
Yeah.
And I realized my VPN had expired.
I see. You have to renew it.
And I had to renew it. And in this dream, I was like, how am I going to do this? And so I go into the website and I try using my credit cards and they're rejected. So
they don't allow the credit card payments, the VPN software in the dream. Yeah.
They
would only accept Bitcoin, right?
So then I tried using some various fintech apps. Let's say there was one called, I don't know, Ali Cloud or Alipay or WeChat and others. Couldn't make any of them work. And out of desperation, because I needed this to stay in touch, there was an option for Bitcoin.
To pay by Bitcoin.
And
you don't have any Bitcoin.
I don't have Bitcoin. I just vaguely know what Bitcoin is, but I don't really know what Bitcoin is.
Yes.
And I click on that, and this was the best thing that ever happened to me, right? I will never have an investment as good as this again. I go into Bitcoin.
Yeah.
And it will only let me buy in these massive increments. It was like $1,000 increments.
Oh, wow.
And I'm
you don't remember the site?
I don't now.
It was
it linked to it from when I clicked on the VPN. I clicked on this. I dreamed maybe it's a fake site. Who knows? I dreamed on, and anyway, I go in it, and it lets me buy Bitcoin.
Yeah, but you can only buy $1,000.
I bought $1,000 of Bitcoin,
which is way too much for paying for the.
Yeah, I needed $199 for my VPN, and so then I buy it, and I expect instant gratification.
Yeah.
But no, I buy the Bitcoin, and then it makes me wait 24 hours, and I get a code for my Bitcoin.
Yeah.
So I think I have just lost $1,000, and I'm just like, something. Should I cancel my credit card? What should I do? I think I've been ripped off. And the next day I get my email with, I forget exactly how it worked, but then I had a wallet or something that gave me my Bitcoin.
Oh, so you got the Bitcoin.
I got the Bitcoin, and then the next day I got my VPN working.
You paid for the VPN, and you had some left over?
And I had like $900 left over.
Yeah.
Which I
worth the Bitcoin.
Worth a Bitcoin.
Yeah.
And I don't know how many fractions of a coin it was or what, but I had this. And then I proceeded to forget about it. Not forget about it, I mean, I still had it because I'm organized enough, I kept track of it all, but but did not look at it again until I saw the ballet card 2 years later, maybe.
Okay.
And I thought, oh, I had to transfer my Bitcoin from here to there. And at that point, my Bitcoin had gone up from $900 to several $1,000s.
Wow.
And so I was like, wow, the best investment I will have ever made. It was by
thanks
total
to the
accident.
VPN dream.
Thanks to that dream. So one day I'm hoping this dream will come true, and I will get my, I don't know what it was, 5x or 6x or whatever it was, but I remember it was a lot. So.
And then did you move the Bitcoins out?
I moved the Bitcoins out.
You did.
I moved
and
the
that worked.
That worked. Yes.
That is very important.
It took a long time. It was. I admit it was not as easy as I thought it would be.
Yep.
And
jump through hoops.
Yes.
But you're good at that, jumping through all these hoops.
I worked in the government, and that's what we do. So not only do we jump through hoops, we can also create hoops for others to jump through. Okay. So I think that I may be an SME on that, a subject matter expert on hoop jumping. So if you need some tips.
Okay.
But so we did that, and but anyway, so I got it and I put it on my ballet, and then you and I started talking about Bitcoin. I remember you gave me your book, and you were telling me all your predictions on what's going to happen and where it's going to go. And I was like, you know what? Bobby's a pretty smart guy. He's a pretty cool guy, and I don't know this stuff. And so I was like, okay. And so I started dumping money. That was pejorative. Consciously investing money in Bitcoin. Yeah. And I invested, and I just sort of, as I do with investments, I think it's best to not look at them. And so I invested and then just ignored them for a couple of years. So, but that was how I got into Bitcoin.
Cool. Very good story. Yeah. So any key lessons or any regrets or what would you like to share with our audience in terms of what you've learned?
Well, so like everybody else, I wish that site that I bought my first $1,000 worth of Bitcoin on only came in $5,000 increments so I could retire. But no. So that would be my first one. My second one was, because I wasn't paying attention to sort of prices or anything, it was just as I would do my investment mix. So at the end of the year, when you get your tax refund, I take my tax refund. I'm like, I'll put this much in a mutual fund and this much here. And I'm like, and I'll put this much in sort of Bitcoin. Yeah. That's something that early on, I wish I had done more of, right? Yeah. Now I think it's a little, now I think it takes a lot longer to sort of get returns. But at the time, I wish I'd done it more early. And then I guess I wish I had paid sort of more attention to it because, it has been up and it has been down. Yeah. And again, my investment strategy is invest and look away so you're not
tempted by the short-term movements, right?
To buy or sell. But I think there's been enough swings in Bitcoin that a little more managed focus would have probably served me well. Yeah,
it's also a double-edged sword. I don't know, did you ever had to panic sell or panic buy?
Well, so I don't know if you remember this. So I was on the verge of a panic buy. And
Meaning
panic sell.
Panic sell.
Panic sell.
If it goes down a lot, you're like scared. You might want to sell your Bitcoins.
Yes.
On a verge.
On a verge, right? And I'm like, and it's going to be worse because I remember when I sell my Bitcoin with I was in Coinbase. Yeah. It's not an instant thing. It's not like, here you sold it. It takes a certain amount of time to move through it. And I thought, it's just going to be even worse. And around the time I was like, I got to sell. I was at my neighbor's house and I run into my good buddy Bobby. And you were like, no, it'll be okay. So instead of selling everything, I sold about half.
Okay.
And now I'm glad I did. Now because it's recovered and it's doing much better. But so the second sort of random encounter with Bobby that sort of pushed me on the right path. Yeah.
So it's gone up quite a bit since, I don't know what price you bought at, but it's gone up in the last 2 years. Yeah. Since then,
yeah. So I think now. I think if I were to run the numbers, if I take out that first 1,000, I think I'm just a little bit above the break-even point from where we are now. So I think we're
My prediction: if things go well, I think you're going to see a multi-time return. On your overall Bitcoin investment, and especially because now the ETFs have been approved.
Well, that's what I was going to ask. Because I saw that a tweet was released by
the SEC.
The SEC, yes. That then retracted, and I was thinking to myself, how does one
retract?
Have a well-crafted tweet that goes out and then gets retracted? But I guess it was done a few days later. But I don't actually know quite what that means. What does that mean?
The ETF retraction or the
ETF? I know.
So ETF in general, the ETF is a 3-letter acronym. It stands for Exchange Traded Fund. Exchange Traded Fund. The exchange stands for like a stock exchange, and it's a fund that is listed on the stock exchange for people to buy and sell through their own brokerage account. So you might have a Charles Schwab, Ameritrade, E-Trade brokerage account, or Merrill Lynch, whatnot. And normally people buy stocks and bonds through the brokerage account. And normally, this is before the ETF, it's not possible to buy Bitcoin through a brokerage account. You have to go to a Bitcoin crypto exchange, such as Coinbase, Kraken, or whatnot, to buy your Bitcoin and cryptocurrency. So these are two different things. But with an exchange-traded fund, with an ETF, what they've done is some companies, very prominent ones like Fidelity, BlackRock, and many others, there's about 10 or 11 ETFs now approved for Bitcoin, what they call spot Bitcoin trading. And this is recently approved by the SEC. So it means that these companies are now offering a product, a fund, that its sole purpose of this investment vehicle fund is to hold Bitcoin to allow investors like yourself and others to buy these shares of these Bitcoin funds through their normal brokerage account. So essentially, one way to put it is Bitcoin has now gone public, like an IPO for Bitcoin. So now regular people can buy Bitcoin in ETFs in their regular brokerage account. You could buy it in a retirement account. Think of your IRA or the Roth IRA account, or you can even buy it as an investment account for your children. Some people have set up college fund accounts for their children, these education college fund accounts. So you could buy it for them as well. But just bear in mind, Bitcoin is still very volatile. So if you do buy into these ETFs, it's going to be very volatile compared to buying classic blue chip stocks.
So if I can ask, it sounds to me like what you're saying is that with an ETF, Bitcoin becomes an asset class of its own, which means that in a proper IRA, if it does appreciate over 15 or 20 years, then there are really big tax advantages. Is that right? Or is it not treated that way?
Yes, because in a retirement account, what happens is the gains and losses from your trading, you don't pay capital gains tax on it right away. Rather, everything's netted out. Everything gets taxed at the end when you withdraw the money for regular IRA accounts. So you're doing what they call tax deferral. So if you do a lot of trading, then all that taxation is deferred until you withdraw it upon retirement age. Yeah, that's for IRA accounts. But the important thing is not about the tax benefits, but rather the fact that you can now buy into Bitcoin through your IRA accounts, whereas you could not before.
So what does that mean for a company like Coinbase, right? Where the only thing you do on Coinbase is various cryptos. Now what happens? Everyone migrate from that to...
You don't have to. You could. So Coinbase stock did actually drop a little bit from the news about the ETF approval. People are worried that Coinbase is going to lose out on business. But in reality, they're not going to lose out, because overall, if there's more global demand, more demand for American investors in the Bitcoin ETFs, in the underlying Bitcoin, these ETFs would have to then buy, sell Bitcoin through exchanges like Coinbase. And plus, many of them actually arrange the custody of the Bitcoin itself with Coinbase custody. So Coinbase benefits regardless. So I'm not too worried about an exchange like Coinbase in relation to the approval of the ETF. It's just more acceptance in general. So yeah, now more people are aware of Bitcoin, more people can invest in it, more choices. So now you can buy Bitcoin either by putting money in Coinbase and buying the Bitcoin in Coinbase, or you can buy Bitcoin by putting money inside your stock brokerage account and then buying the ETF version of that.
Interesting. Well, so it's funny because, my one of my brokerage accounts has got an AI broker advisor, which I find quite obnoxious.
Artificial intelligence broker advisor.
Yes, and they tell me, our AI broker advisor advises that you look at A, B, C, D, E, and then and it, because it's got access to all my data. I'm kind of irritated that it looks at all my data and it's like, oh, you have this many kids and they're this old. You should be focusing on this. I don't want the AI to know all that, right? But it does. But so now what you're saying is that instead of investing, I should be switching to more dividend-based sort of stocks. So now I'm going to see my AI advisor tell me, oh, have I looked at Bitcoin? Yeah.
It might.
Interesting. But so these ETFs, there's so apologies for the basic question.
No, that's great.
But there's a million different cryptos, right?
Correct.
Are all of them eligible for ETFs?
Oh, okay.
Or is it just
question.
certain ones?
Yeah. So let's break it down this way. You're right. There are a lot of cryptos. Probably not technically a million, but certainly over 1,000.
Okay.
Thousands of cryptos. Okay. So Bitcoin by far is the most popular and the most well known.
Okay.
And it's the most blue chip, the most safe.
Okay.
I mean, Bitcoin itself is very volatile, but the overall crypto market is super volatile. So Bitcoin is the most bread and butter crypto. And that's
the blue chip of crypto.
Yeah, that's even though I'm not an investment advisor and so on, but that's what I myself have invested in, and that's what I tell my own friends and family to invest in if they want to invest in crypto.
Okay.
So as for the other ones, they're not approved for ETF. So the SEC has only so far approved Bitcoin for ETF funds. Ethereum may come next, but it hasn't happened yet. We don't know what the time frame is, but so far only Bitcoin has been approved. And the reason is that the SEC has actually ruled that Bitcoin is a commodity. And there's a distinction in securities language where it's something a commodity versus something being security. So it has actually considered many of the other cryptos to be securities, and which would fall into securities law, and there's lots of investment protection rules around it, disclosure and filing of registered securities, blah, blah, blah. So Bitcoin is in a class of itself. So Bitcoin got approved first for ETF. I think that's all good and dandy. The rest of the crypto, I think it's still very murky. And unless you're well versed in it, I would not recommend it for anyone to sort of mingle in that.
Yeah, I don't know if you know the answer to this or if this is black box.
Yeah.
But do we know what the criteria was that the SEC used to say Bitcoin is a commodity where these alternative currencies are not? So we could sort of say this currency is getting closer to commodity status. Do we know what the calculus was?
I can give you my perspective. I've never worked for the SEC. I don't know their exact rules. But generally speaking, I think the definition of security is basically it's an instrument where the underlying value depends on something else, right? So if you buy, for example, Apple stock, the stock certificates for Apple, the company, the stock that you buy, the paper is worthless, but the paper represents value of the company.
Right.
And its future potential earnings.
1
billionth of the company and the earnings per share and all that. So that's a security. Right. So including derivatives, stock options for Apple, including futures, warrants, and stuff like that. Those are all securities. So whereas a commodity would be something more natural, something that's just, whether it's gold, silver, whether it's pork belly, whether it's wheat, corn, those are commodities. Whether it's scrap metal, whether it's, so Bitcoin is considered that, because the thing about Bitcoin is not, there's no company behind Bitcoin. There's no centralized team that owns Bitcoin, that issues Bitcoin. So Bitcoin was invented, almost 15 years ago, or at least, Bitcoin actually did turn 15 already. So Bitcoin was invented, created 15 years ago to be this decentralized digital currency. So at this point, no one controls it, no one owns it. It's just this thing that exists, it's circulating, people use it, just like gold, right? So you can say God created gold, but there's no active team of people on earth that manages, that gives credentials and allows people to use gold, buy gold, sell gold, right? Gold, you and I could trade however we want. So gold, diamond, a lot of things, physical things are commodities. And so Bitcoin's been classified as that.
So it's the first virtual commodity.
It's the first digital commodity. Absolutely. You're right.
Okay. Yeah. So if I can go down another path.
Yeah, please.
So I hear about various central banks issuing their own digital currencies.
Yes.
Is that that's a completely different
It's beast? A different thing. They call it CBDC, Central Bank Digital Currency. So what they are is basically they're issuing a new digital version of the money the central bank previously issued. So think about the U.S. Our central bank is the Federal Reserve, right? In the EU, European countries, they have something called the ECB, the European Central Bank. In Japan, they have one, Central Bank of Japan, whatnot. In China, there's something called the PBOC, the People's Bank of China. And so each country that has their own currency has a central bank authority that issues a currency. So most countries actually have two versions of the currency. Actually, it's three. The first version is the paper currency that you and I are familiar with, each country, euros and Japanese yen and US dollars. The second version is actually the coin version, right? It actually has the same value. People don't think of them as different, but they are different. The paper version and the coin version could even have the same denomination. They have the same exchange value, but they're physically different, right? And the third version is electronic money, which is the bank deposits. You see the balance. So these three are interchangeable. So you can go to the ATM and exchange from the electronic version to the paper version, and you go to a store, you take the paper version to the coin version, and vice versa. You could do all these three. So what they're doing is some central banks are issuing a fourth version called digital money, and China's done that. So it's CBDC, the central bank issued digital currency of the Chinese renminbi, the CNY currency. The US has not done that yet, but several countries have talked about issuing it. So some countries are issuing their own sort of central bank version digital currency version of their national currency.
Okay, so there's actually nothing crypto about it.
There is, it borrows some of the concepts like blockchain, ledger, but it's not fully decentralized, and it's not fully compatible with the open, decentralized versions of the crypto.
But it sounds like it's also got, if we're comparing it with paper money and coins and virtual money, it sounds like, unlike Bitcoin, which may be volatile, it sounds like your digital whatever currency, digital yuan or digital pound.
Yeah.
It's not volatile because it's...
Oh, yeah, correct. It'll be tied to the value of that. So if it's a British pound, if there were eventually a Bank of England issuing a central bank digital pound, it would have the same value as a sterling pound today.
Okay, so there's no... So in my mind, I was thinking, oh, well, okay, if we go one step further, if you've got Bitcoin and then you've got countries that are now issuing, but there is no investment particular value in a central bank digital currency unless you happen to be playing the Forex game of some sort.
Exactly. Okay. Correct.
So it is a different beast.
It's a different beast. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but they try to make it as if it's the same and better, but I see it as different and worse.
Okay. Well, so I want to look down the road then.
Yeah.
So I've got money sitting in my Coinbase. I've got money sitting in, that I track with my Ballet.
Yeah.
My son has got a variety because he's very into this. He's read your book. Thank you for that.
Yes.
But so now that it's an ETF, what's next? When does it get easier to spend Bitcoin?
Okay. So great question. People always, so the reason you ask that question is that you have an underlying presumption that Bitcoin has to be spendable for it to be useful, eventually globally adopted. Is that fair?
It just needs to be more convenient for me to do more than let it just sort of sit in its account.
Okay.
Meaning,
but I argue as an investment, it doesn't have to be that way. So I hold a certain perspective that is not necessarily shared by the whole crypto audience. So, for example, I don't know if you invest in Apple stock or General Motors or Starbucks. These are all public companies in the U.S. So if you buy those stocks, the reason you buy it is because you think and believe in the investment potential return of that stock. You think over 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, it will bring you greater return than leaving that same amount of money in the bank account, getting some basic bank interest rate, right? So same thing for me. This again, I have my certain viewpoint. I think Bitcoin is a great investment asset class. It doesn't need to be spendable per se. You were able to, for example, pay for the VPN service. Today, you can use Bitcoin to pay for a variety of goods and services, but in the grand scheme of society, it's not greatly usable. I can't pay for my hotel stays. I can't pay for my Starbucks, or for lunch today we went for burgers. We can't necessarily pay Bitcoin for it. But there are burger shops, there are travel agents, and there are some hotels that will accept Bitcoin as payment, just not all of them.
Right. So, but so looking down the road. So if I look at
even 5-10 years later,
Okay. So I'm just thinking, so you've got the world's first digital commodity, right?
Yes.
So in theory, we're treating it like gold, but gold, you're right. To spend, no one's going to take gold. You're not going to do that, right?
Yeah.
So you got to sell it. But that's what I'm wondering is that, so because Bitcoin has coin in the name, I get the sense that it could someday become more liquid.
It could.
Than it is now. And that's what I was wondering is if ETF might.
No.
What's next?
Yeah.
Is there anything that's next?
Yeah. So just to clarify, the ETF does not help Bitcoin's effort to become more spendable or useful in daily society. I just want to make that very clear.
Right.
So just because Bitcoin has now been listed as an ETF, you can buy Bitcoin through your brokerage account, doesn't mean that you can go to Starbucks tomorrow and spend Bitcoin there. Absolutely no. Well, so even Tesla selling these cars, at one point they accepted Bitcoin. I think they rescinded that. I don't know if they still do or not. But effectively, I recently bought a Tesla. I shared the story. Even though I did not pay Tesla in Bitcoin, I paid them in US dollar through bank transfer. I effectively bought Bitcoin. I effectively bought my Tesla car using Bitcoin because the money I was able to spend on the Tesla car was from the gain in investment from my early investment in Bitcoin. So I made money in Bitcoin, and that's what allowed me to buy the Tesla car. Does that make sense?
It does.
So that's sort of my perspective today. And I'll reserve my right to change my opinion in 5 years, but that's sort of my perspective.
Well, so now I'm intrigued to try it out in my brokerage account, because I know when I look at my brokerage account, I'll be like, okay, well, I'm interested in X stock. And so I put in my buy order, and then 24 hours later, I get a notice saying, oh, you managed to acquire whatever stock.
Yes.
And so
now you can buy Bitcoin
Now
ETF.
Bitcoin is going to be exactly the same.
Yes. So you just search, basically go to the stock brokerage platform, whatever you use, search for Bitcoin. There'll be maybe half a dozen or more of these ETFs that come up. This is the Vanguard or Fidelity Bitcoin ETF. This is the BlackRock Bitcoin ETF. This is the Grayscale Bitcoin ETF. And then you can select which one to buy. They'll have different liquidity, different prices, and then you put in your order however many shares of that ETF you want to buy. And then you buy it. And then when Bitcoin price doubles and quadruples in the next few years, if it does, then the value of your ETF will also double and quadruple.
So let me ask this then. So let's say I buy who does one of these ETFs?
Grayscale and BlackRock.
So let's say Grayscale.
Yeah.
So when I buy Grayscale,
GBTC, the ticker's called GBTC.
So I buy GBTC.
Yes.
I'm not actually buying Bitcoin. I'm buying a vehicle that is priced on Bitcoin.
It has invested in Bitcoin. You're buying the Bitcoin ETF, GBTC, and then when you buy that, there's a company that manages it. The company is called Grayscale, and they have acquired a lot of Bitcoin. They manage that Bitcoin, and they sell their shares as GBTC.
Okay.
So when the amount of Bitcoin in there stays the same, but let's say the value goes up, let's say it doubles in price over the next 18 months, let's say. So 18 months from now, they still have this many Bitcoin, but the overall value has doubled in price. So the value of ETF, the ETF price of GBTC will also have doubled, roughly.
Right. So it is different than what I have at, say, Ballet or Coinbase,
Correct.
where I'm actually owning Bitcoin.
That's right.
I'm owning... It's almost like So this is like to stocks what ADRs are, right? I mean,
that's right. That's right. Yeah,
so
kind of like the ADRs version of the stocks. Yeah. Okay. ADR stands for American Depository Receipts. Yeah, that's exactly a good analogy.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah. For people who understand it, not everyone gets it. But,
Okay. But so I had no idea what this means. So it means that I'm buying essentially a mutual fund kind of product. It just happens to be the underlying asset is Bitcoin.
Yes.
Which makes it really interesting from the SEC regulatory perspective.
Yes,
fascinating.
Yes, and that's why they had to approve it, because everything's under the jurisdiction of SEC. The ETF is a security, by the way. Right. Buying the Bitcoin itself is not, but now if you buy GBTC, that is a security, which is why it had to get SEC approval.
Yeah. So
I can't just go there and say list my own ETF. I have to get my ETF approved by the SEC, and then if they approve my ETF, then we call it Bobby Bitcoin ETF. Right.
Okay.
Hypothetically.
Right.
Not that I would do it, but.
Yeah. No. So what are the theoretical differences that could exist between the various ETFs besides the name? Grayscale, Blackstone, Fidelity, or whatever. What are the theoretical differences? Or is there really any theoretical difference?
They have different people managing it. They may have different custodian arrangements. They have different fee structures, and they will have different natural trading volumes, and therefore liquidity, and therefore price
volatility.
Yeah. What do you call it? The
amplitude.
The bid-ask spread. Yeah. So these days, the largest ones are probably Grayscale and the BlackRock one. Okay.
So it sounds like when looking at ETFs, pay attention to fees, because that could be it could be a difference.
It could be. So Grayscale had converted their previously, it was a Bitcoin trust into a Bitcoin ETF. So they lower their fees, but the fees are still quite high. Their fee is now 1.5% per annum.
Oh.
Whereas some of the other ones are now newly listed, they're only charging 1/4% or 0.5% in annual fees. So even though the Grayscale fee is higher, the reason they get away with it is because a lot of people may already own that, and they may not want to sell for tax reasons. Because if you sell it, you have to pay capital gains tax on your gains.
Yeah.
Right. So there's some not monopoly, but there's some market reasons why they're able to maintain a higher fee structure than the other guys.
It's a good thing a good thing my initial purchases were in a dream, because I have no idea how I would calculate accurately my capital gains. So
well, now by buying the ETFs, the brokerage will send.
Right, they'll make it easy.
They'll send you the 1099s, and then you can just send that to your accountant or do it in TurboTax, and it'll tell you exactly what your buy price was, your sell price, and all that will be very clean. So
that's
another
clean.
benefit. That's another benefit.
Okay.
Yeah, whereas if you did it in Coinbase, you have to do it by hand.
Right.
Because by doing it by buying, selling Coinbase, you do not.
Yeah.
As an American, as American citizens, we do not get to escape the IRS tax system. It doesn't mean that you don't pay tax on it. You still have to pay taxes. You just have to self-report. But buying through an ETF, everything's automatic for you.
Oh, so that does mean that it's simpler anyway.
Yeah, in that sense, it does. Yeah.
Okay. So, predictions on what these ETFs will do? Will they make the overall Bitcoin, I guess, market more liquid? Does it create upward space? What do we? I don't know if you're in the business of making predictions, but
yeah, I think the ETF. The ETF approval for Bitcoin is a great development for Bitcoin and the cryptocurrency community at large. The reason is opens up Bitcoin investment to more people. So regular mom and pop, regular people in America or around the world who have access to US stock brokerage accounts can now invest in Bitcoin more easily, as opposed to going through all the crazy steps to opening an exchange account and doing that. And plus, with the approval of the ETFs in the US, many other stock markets around the world can now approve their own ETF versions for Bitcoin.
Oh, interesting. So this is where you're going to tell me I'm wrong. So as I get ready to do a face plant into the pavement, stop me. But this is where maybe you might be too pessimistic. But not quite. And what I'm thinking is, with my I've got existing brokerage accounts.
Yes.
And I remember,
US-based.
Yes. And I remember with one of them I opened with a large US bank.
Yes.
I didn't even know, but they sent me what looks like a credit card that's branded Visa that goes against my brokerage account. And then anytime I use that credit card, it just goes against and draws down the money that I have invested in this brokerage account that's mutual funds and individual stocks and all of that. And so it could make Bitcoin more liquid as these brokerage accounts start issuing instruments against those.
Yeah, these debit cards against them. Yeah, that's a good way to do it too. Yeah. So imagine you buy the ETF, and then every so often you take some profit off the table. You sell the ETF, the money sits in your brokerage account, and then you use that Visa card. You can spend and pay for burgers and coffee and French fries, and now essentially you're spending money that you earn from Bitcoin. Yeah,
but with my existing brokerage account, I don't even have to do that sell. What'll happen is, if I use that account, it'll calculate how many shares of whatever that fund is. Yeah. Okay. And so I don't even have to think about it, and it just draws down.
There you go.
Yeah. So anyway, on the other hand, though, I think I'm probably a little more optimistic than that. As I told you earlier, I tend to, if I invest, I'm going to sit on it for years.
Excellent.
And so I don't actually need that liquidity, but it would be kind of cool to have if the next time I'm dreaming about being in remote Jiangsu and need
VPN service.
Yeah, then maybe it'll work. I don't know. But.
Good. Very good. So good. Thank you for being a guest on my podcast.
It was absolutely an honor.
So we should connect again in 5-10 years and see where things are at.
Yes, that would be great.
Very exciting.
Hopefully it won't be 5-10 years. Hopefully I'll visit you if you relocate, I'll visit you in your new home.
Yeah.
But in any case,
good.
Let's not wait 5 or 10 years.
Okay, thank you. So thanks again to Sean for being a great guest on the Bobby Lee Bitcoin podcast, and see you all again soon.